Hey guys, I'm so excited to be here. This is our first entrepreneurial podcast in the Space Coast Content Studio, and I'm here with my favorite entrepreneur, my dad. And he also won the National Small Business of the Year Awards from the US Chamber of Commerce. So with more than 40 years of experience, 20 plus years owning his own company, he's a wealth of knowledge, and today I'm going to pick his brain. So as entrepreneurs, especially getting started, I think we experience a lot of self-doubt and fear. When was a time that you've experienced self-doubt and fear in the beginning of starting your business?
Well, I think just pulling the trigger to start the business, that first step is a doozy. And for me, it meant cutting ties with a stable job and a comfortable situation. And a lot like jumping out of a perfectly good airplane, which I know you can relate to.
Yep.
So there's total exhilaration on the one hand because you have unlimited freedom, unlimited ceilings. But on the other, you have utter terror because there is no safety net and you've got only yourself to be accountable to and be responsible for and to.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So if you could go back and tell that version of you 1 to 2 tips to alleviate that self-doubt, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I'd say follow your heart. Number one, be encouraged by your dreams. Then once you have a viable idea that you believe in, you're passionate about, go for it. Don't hesitate. I really wish I'd started sooner.
That's interesting. I think we hear that a lot in the entrepreneurial community of the only regret people have is just wishing they had started sooner.
I agree. You'll sense the risk of failure in venturing forward. And sometimes we play that a little too loudly in our minds, I think, because there's also risk in staying put. And I think more than anything else, we tend to overlook the opportunity costs of not taking an action. And especially if we're risk averse by nature, like I was trained to be as an engineer,
Right.
we can miss seeing the cost of foregoing our dreams and tapping into our full potential.
That's such a good point. That's really valuable. Hope you guys are getting a lot out of this because that's really good. So, does the fear and self doubt ever go away?
No,
Oh,
not completely. It changes. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and some businesses I started and went well, and some didn't. I definitely had all sorts of fears and doubts along the way, and naturally, you want every step of your business to go well and work out, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it works out even better than you hoped it would. So I would just say my fears and doubts softened and evolved as I matured, and I would they changed from worrying about things like making a payroll to making significance and creating opportunities for employees, and so on.
right. Definitely. And keeping that competitive edge above other people and
Yes,
not slowing down.
absolutely.
So now that we've covered overcoming fear and self-doubt, which is probably one of the first things that you tend to face when you're wanting to get started, let's go over some things like mission and core values. When you were starting your business, at what stage did you start contemplating your mission and your core values?
So I was probably about 36 years old, and I was at a point in my life where I was feeling a restlessness, a sense of just being unsettled about what my spiritual calling was at that point in life. And I had a great job, had golden handcuffs, a 5-year-old daughter, and but I just felt like my professional destiny was somewhere else. So I called my wife at work one day and said, "Hear me out." And I suggested that we were at a point in life that we could take some money out of savings, and while Sarah was 5 and before she started to school, it would be a great time to travel around the country, reflect on what my calling was, what we felt like we should do next in life, where we wanted to live, and so on. So we bought a repo RV, traveled 22,000 miles around the U.S., leased our house out for a year, followed the seasons, and we went to 35 states, 4 provinces in Canada. And along the way, I was just praying and meditating and trying to discern where God was calling me at this stage in life. And I just I really wanted a lightning bolt, a big idea. But really what I kept getting was this still small voice around start a business and lead a business that treats people like you would want to be treated. And so that's what I came back to Knoxville, Tennessee and did. And that's where strategy began.
Wow. So were your core values something that you developed on your own, or how did they come to be for you?
Yeah, so I mentioned this sense of calling around the ideal of treating people like you wanted to be treated. And when we talk about core values, they are really the essence of who we are, our identity. So when you try to define and articulate core values, it comes from reflection and soul searching. So trying to distill that down in my life out of the universe of possibilities, the essential essence and the non-negotiables that we came up with and that I felt like were fundamental to who I was and what mattered most to me were integrity, service, and quality. And that was key really to everything about forming and growing the company, because those were the foundational building blocks that everything else was built on.
That makes a lot of sense. And sometimes, a lot of times, you don't see that in the business world. So I think in a way it's something that allows that law of contrast to come out and really help you to stand out as a business.
I found that integrity in business was a great discriminator. A lot of people talk about it, but sometimes it's hard to practice it in little things and in big things. And it really does make a difference. And I think you're right.
As far as building your reputation and things like that, it's key. So why are these core values so important to the success of a company?
Well, they're the fundamental building blocks that everything else in the company is built on. So it's really vital that every person on the team understands what the core values are, why they're important to the team, and that they're in alignment with them. If an individual doesn't agree with the core values, it's really better for them to find another place to work, another organization to be in, because they'll probably fit better there. Jim Collins wrote a great book called Built to Last, and in that he talks about how core values are fundamental to forming the culture of a company. And that if someone is in the company and they don't fit the culture, they tend to be ejected like a virus. It's that
Wow.
kind of response between the culture and an individual who's not in alignment there.
Wow.
So they create a framework for expectations, accountability, and really rules of engagement for the team. And I would say this too, the core values have to be not just from the employee to the company, but from the company to the employee, and from the company to all stakeholders, and from employee to employee. So all those dynamics hinge on agreement and alignment with core values.
Interesting. I wouldn't have even thought about it that way in this context. So
Yeah, you know, that word culture means to grow. And a lot of people say, how do you build a culture? And my belief is you don't build a culture, you build circumstances and conditions that enable a culture that you would like to see happen grow, kind of like a beautiful mother from a kombucha standpoint. And then that culture becomes even more important than any one individual in the company. It sustains.
I love that. I love that. That's really interesting. Talked about the core values and mission and things like that. I know from experience that you're really, really talented at building a team, and not just any team, but a team of the best. And maybe not even just in skill sets or talents, but in the type of people that you hire and that you work with, you surround yourself with. So what did you do during the hiring process to make sure that you hired great people that would fit that culture that we just talked about?
Yeah. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I feel so blessed to have been part of the team that grew. I think the most important thing is to early on keeping a mental list of people who were great in the business. That way you really got to try before you buy, so to speak. You got to see what they were all about even before you brought them into the company. So I would say for any business owner to scout your space for the best in class performers. A little bit like picking out a watermelon, you know, if you could see into the center of it, you could always get a ripe one. And if you're
Yeah.
picking people that you're watching work day in and day out, and you see that integrity, service, quality mindset, you know they're a good fit. Then after that, I would say from the beginning of the company, I always asked every person that interviewed in our company what each of those core values meant to them. And that was important at the beginning during that process for the individual to understand what the company valued, to weigh in and see how those values aligned in their life, what they meant to them, and then make a decision mutually about whether that's a fit or not. We also use the top grading interview process that we learned from a book by Brad Smart called Top Grading, and it kept us focused on hiring A players, and did that in a really methodical way, because as our company grew, I wasn't interviewing every single person we hired, but we wanted to be sure the process was in place so that we followed the same guidelines and got the best people.
Right.
And then lastly, like attracts like. And once you're built a team, and I claim that if you have 3 or more great people on your team and you continue with a habit of hiring great people, it creates a momentum that attracts other great people.
That makes a lot of sense. So in the process of starting a company, we all hit that point of going from doing it all ourselves to it being time for that first hire. What was your first hire, and how did you know when it was the right time?
So I was growing a professional services company in the environmental and nuclear engineering and science space. And so for me, that was relatively easy because my first hires were experts that I was selling to customers, so they were profit centers. So that was pretty easy at the beginning. But then when we needed to begin to add overhead personnel to support the company, my basic answer to your question would be, when it's clear that it's costing you more money and more pain not to have that person there to help, that's the time that it makes sense to add them to the team. I use my executive assistant as an example, but bringing her on board more than multiplied the benefit to me in terms of my productivity and the team's productivity. And so it was a no-brainer to add that extra cost.
I like that perspective. And that's always a scary part, getting started and finding out how to balance the costs with what you can generate as you're trying to grow at a proper pace.
Yeah.
Not too quickly, or kind of going back to kombucha, not too quickly and not too slowly, or the flavors won't be right. So
yeah, it's exactly like that. And when you add somebody to your team, that's a big responsibility for you and to you for them. And so I think you asked about fears before, and that was one of the things that never left me, was the sense of responsibility to a teammate and not wanting to try to grow so fast that at some point I'd have to say something went wrong and then I couldn't keep them employed.
Right. Right. That's something I've noticed always about your work and the way that you do things is you go above and beyond to make sure that you can keep your team members and not only keep them, but keep them happy and take care of them and grow together. And that's something that's always inspired me. So I want to work that into all of the businesses that we create over time.
Sounds great. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about pitfalls, since I know it's not always rosy in the process of entrepreneurship. I hear a good bit in the personal development world about learning from other people's mistakes rather than your own and avoiding common pitfalls. What are some common pitfalls that you could share with other entrepreneurs to help them avoid mistakes you've seen others make?
I mentioned that I have a lot of knots on my head I learn more from mistakes than the things I do right. I think we all do probably. But 4 things come to mind when you ask me that. One is, and this is a warning because entrepreneurs have a certain nature of curiosity and risk-taking and so on. And I would say be opportunistic, but stay focused on your core business. It's really easy for an entrepreneur to get distracted. So that's one. Number 2, I'd say beware of rainmakers who say they can do this or that great thing for your company. They sometimes can prey on self-doubt. There are people out there that do that. And I would just say screen and contract people that you're paying. Number 3, I'd say believe in yourself and persist through your self-doubts. That's a pitfall. We can succumb to our self-doubts sometimes. And I think it's also one of the reasons faith is so important in the journey of an entrepreneur. And the last one I'd say is hire slow, fire fast. And that sounds harsh, but it's really a better approach for everybody involved. If things aren't working out with an employee, to let them know and give them an opportunity to go be successful somewhere else. But building your team, you have to hire very slowly and be meticulous about who you add to your team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it is always obviously harder to let somebody go too. So it saves everybody some trouble if you do that work on the front end to make sure you're hiring the best candidates for the culture, for the skill set and things that you need. So
Absolutely true.
So let's talk about success. That's the one thing I think we're all hoping for. And maybe I shouldn't say hoping, because we know it's not going to be an accident. It's going to be something we work for on a daily basis. Your company has been awarded dozens and dozens of awards, local and national awards, like the National Small Business of the Year Award, I believe twice, once as a veteran-owned company, from the United States Chamber of Commerce. You know, these are a really big deal, and this is obviously somewhere I'd like to see myself be in the future with our businesses. And I know, you know, a lot of the people watching, they aspire to that. So what do you attribute your success to?
Well, I think the essentials to be successful in any business are integrity, competence, passion, hard work, commitment to listening and learning, and the team you surround yourself with. I think those are essential in any business, and I've tried to apply those in my work. But for me, more than anything else, I would say providence. I feel like a lot of people do the things I mentioned. They have integrity, they're competent, they work hard, and so on. But for whatever reasons, my ventures have been successful. And I credit Providence for that. One of my favorite movies, you know, is Forrest Gump.
Yes.
And I love the introduction to that movie, the feather that you see floating through the wind in the Forrest Gump introduction. And it's a metaphor for how Forrest's life ends up and how the hand of Providence is on him as he goes through life. And I felt that so many times in my life when it seemed like there wasn't a way forward, or not a clear way forward, or the path was hard, that it just seemed like God always provided for me. So more than anything else, I say it again, providence.
It's interesting. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being my very first entrepreneurship podcast and YouTube video. And it's awesome to get to pick your brain. And
it's an honor to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. If people wanted to follow you or learn more from you, what's the best place for them to reach out and learn more?
Right now, it would just be an email, dhurst@strategy.org. And that's STRATAG.org. But I think maybe that's going to expand. I've got a really great social media coach here at Space Coast Content Studios. And I know you're going to be able to help me increase my exposure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for watching. If this helped you, if you learned anything, please like and subscribe. That, you know, helps us both tremendously. And stay tuned for the next Entrepreneur podcast. We're at Space Coast Content Studio, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all of the above, TikTok. We're everywhere. And he's about to be everywhere. So
TikTok.
We did it.
Thank you.
First podcast. Let us know if you like it.
I thought that was great.